Hello and welcome back to FranklinCovey's twice weekly podcast on leadership with Scott Miller, where for 6 years we have had the privilege of interviewing celebrities, influencers, artists, creators, founders, entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, CEOs, business titans, people that are household names, people that perhaps aren't, but have done something remarkable, dedicated their lives to a particular topic, or maybe even in some cases survived an unspeakable tragedy or setback and summoned the courage and the will, the abundance to come on the podcast and teach through it. All in common, united focus to make you more effective. Our podcast and company was co-founded by Dr. Stephen R. Covey of the seminal book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And FranklinCovey, of course, as the sponsor of this podcast, is known as the most trusted leadership firm in the world. Today, I'm honored to be interviewing someone that's had a broad array of experience: teacher, coach, entrepreneur, TED Talk host. And today she's going to talk about how to be bigger, better, and bolder. Her name is Jennifer Cohen, joining us from Los Angeles. In fact, her most recent book is titled just that, Bigger, Better, and Bolder. Live the life you want, not the life you get. Jennifer Cohen, welcome to On Leadership.
Thank you for having me.
Jen, great to have you here. You've been very patient. I've had to change some of our times and technology around, but you've showed up in such great disposition. You are clearly an energy infuser, and I have thoroughly enjoyed some of the lessons that have come from your book. Today, I'm going to kind of go everywhere and start anywhere. I've got about eight or 10 different topics that I thoroughly found inspiring from your book. Before we get into that, I'd love to rewind a couple of decades. And would you just sort of reorient yourself to our listeners and viewers? You were born where, you did what, and how you got here today?
Wow, that's a huge loaded question, but I'll try my best. I'm Canadian, so I'm from a small town called Winnipeg, not that small, but a small city called Winnipeg. My background actually is business. I was in the music world. I was in the sports world. I went to college, and what I ended up doing was completely the opposite than anything I ever thought I would do, which is that's life. I started a few different companies, eventually sold them, and now I have my own podcast called Habits and Hustle. And really, my goal and my philosophy and what I try to do with people is teach them to chase what they want and not just take what they get. Because I think a lot of times, most people acquiesce to what's available as opposed to really going after what really is what they want. And we can talk all about that.
Jen, you mentioned that one of the things that you invest your time and attention and brand in is the Habits and Hustle podcast, a broadly listened to podcast. But it's an interesting way you got there, because you didn't set out to have a podcast. You've got a great story of how, I think, a twist and a turn ended up in a podcast, because you had something else you were working on. I'd love it if you would take as much time as you like. Tell that whole story. How did it pivot to the podcast? And maybe most importantly, what is the lesson to tease out of that everyone can benefit from thinking about?
Absolutely. So, the interesting thing is, and this is one of my core belief systems, is taking action. And you're going to hear about that. But I feel what happened was I really have this, I'm very curious. It starts with curiosity. And I had this idea that I was really wanting to know how the most successful people on the planet really became the most successful person. And what was their routines? What was their habits? And so I created this TV show idea called Game Changers. And I ended up selling the idea as a TV show to NBC. And if anybody knows anything about the television world or the entertainment world, there's a lot of waiting and there's a lot of just talking. And after selling the show, nothing was really happening. I was kind of just like waiting for Godot. Like, we were 1 week turned into a month, turned into 2 months. It was meeting after meeting, and it was really kind of just taking a long time. And I eventually decided, you know what, even though I had this development deal, it sounded really cool. It was a TV idea. It was with a huge network. I just didn't want to I didn't want to put my destiny in somebody else's hands for any longer. And I decided, I'm like, why don't I just make this into this idea, take this concept and just make it into a podcast. And just see what happens. And so I changed the name from Game Changers to Habits and Hustle. And I started my own podcast with the same idea, like talking to the most successful people on the planet and kind of getting an idea of what their habits, what their hustle was and is, to be their most successful, productive person. And that was 5 years ago. And it's obviously worked out well. I've interviewed some of the greatest minds, top experts, world experts, very similar to you. And, funnily enough, how the world works is recently they've come back to me again. They've seen it's a proven concept and wanted to kind of create a TV show again, and modify it a little bit. But, the big life lesson here is really rely on you. You have to be the CEO of your own life. And we tend to feel, and usually we tend to think that other people need to kind of really help us or give us that opportunity, when really the reality is we need to create our own opportunities a lot of the time. And we tend to let our self-doubt stop us from the start. And once we actually go into that mode of taking the initiative and just doing something, it usually takes us on a whole other road. And so, if anything, the lesson learned here is take a chance on yourself and don't let anybody else create your own destiny, and just try. What's the worst that can happen, right? You're not going to be any further, or not going to be any further off bad or than you were when you began. So take the leap. And, if it doesn't work out, usually another opportunity will present itself.
Well, it reminds me of so many adages, have a plan or become part of someone else's plan. Sometimes a disappointment turns into an appointment. I mean, you economized this story for the sake of efficiency, but the fact is you had sold a television pilot to a production company with NBC, and because it wasn't either meeting your time frame or your standards or the content or the style of guest, you basically said, yeah, I'm going to go do something else. And you picked, honestly, a different genre and a different medium, and it's been extraordinarily successful for you. I think it's such a great story of the premise of your book. And one of the premises of your book is that boldness is a skill. Your book is titled Bigger, Better, Boldness, but you teach the fact that boldness is a skill.
Absolutely.
How do you define boldness? Because some people I know that might be introverts or more shy or maybe judgmental on people that are more assertive or charismatic or courageous. How do you define boldness? And what do you think is what are the right ingredients of where boldness works most frequently?
That's a great question. And I think everything stops and starts with that, right? With boldness, because I think what happens is we tend to over-index other people's abilities and under-index our own. That's just kind of what human nature does. And a lot of it, from even all the people I've spoken to, and my own experience, quite frankly, was the fact that, people even with the podcast are like, well, how did you get this guest on? Oh my God, how did you end up doing that? Or how did you do this? And it comes down to the most simple thing, which is I asked for it. And I think that really kind of sums it up. Like, if we kind of could become a little bit more bold and ask for what we actually want, you would be shocked at how much you can get. And to me, it's not that boldness is something that you were born with. You're not either born bold or you're not. Boldness is a skill. And the more you practice it, the better you get at it. And you can practice no matter how introverted you are or how extroverted you are. It doesn't matter. It's about taking the concept and basically starting from like little things, small things, such as if you go to a restaurant and some people are too shy to even ask for, their salad dressing on the side. And if you're that person, start doing things small. Because if you can't ask for the little things in life, you're never going to be comfortable asking for the big things in life. So you can even call up your cell service provider and ask for a new plan. Chances are, because this happens all the time, they're constantly bringing out new plans, you'll save $100 a month by just making that phone call and asking, saying, hey, I'm paying this X amount. What can you get me? What can I get that is, what other plans do you have that I can get the same type of plan? You would be shocked at what becomes available to you. And if I really try to give people the courage to do something today that they didn't have the courage for yesterday. And this is about telling people and trying to explain to people that, like anything else, boldness is a skill. If you want to get good at karate, you got to practice. If you want to learn Spanish, you got to take more than one lesson, right? Everything kind of are building blocks to getting better and better, but it starts with that first step.
So Jen, this is a concept that I do not struggle with. Some people's middle name is boldness. My prefix is boldness. But I want to push on you for a moment, because I think there is a large segment of the population that aren't naturally bold. Like you have guided them, they have to build that muscle. And I think when certain people hear you say this, they kind of apply it universally. For example, I know a person in my life that's not naturally a bold person. They have lots of great qualities, but they're a little more demure and shy and retiring. They have a big personality, but they won't usually ask for what they want. And so I see it frequently. They will hear someone like you tell them to ask for what they want. And they'll ask me for something, and it actually injures their credibility. I'm like, no, how would you think I would do that? That shows bad judgment. No, that's not appropriate for your position in the organization. And it's not that I'm denying them, because I don't think, I'm not trying to minimize their boldness, but I will tell you as a leader, sometimes I think people misinterpret this and just start asking for outrageous things. I see it frequently, and I think, no, that's damaging your brand with me, because I think you don't know where you fit in this value chain. You don't know where you fit on the hierarchy of the organization, and it undermines their credibility. I'm like, no, you should be asking first for these things before you get to this.
Well, I believe that there is an element of EQ, well, first of all, having the self-awareness and the emotional intelligence to kind of knowing how to read a room a little
Yes,
bit, right?
Well said. Amen.
Right? Because you could have people who are very demure and very shy, and they won't ask for anything. And then you have people on the other end of the spectrum who are super audacious and ask for everything in the sun, right? But my message is really for the people who are more on the other side, which is someone who is a little shy, someone who is a little nervous for standing up for themselves, someone who really deserves to get more than they have, but they need a little bit of a nudge. And I believe that those are the people that I'm really speaking to. That's the first part. The second part is, the other just as simple as you don't ask, you don't get, or it's the squeaky wheel that gets the oil, right? These are all cliches. These are all adages because they actually are true, right? And I'm not telling people that they should be
irresponsibly audacious, right?
Or like brass or rude, right? Because there is a fine line. But what I am telling people is, don't just settle for good enough. Don't just settle for good enough because you don't think, A, you can get better, or B, you don't deserve better, or it's not possible. Because I think the real underlying message here is that the people that you are looking up to, who have all the things that you want to have, or have the life that you think you may want, it's not because they're better than you or more talented than you or more skilled than you necessarily. It's actually because they had the courage to ask for it, to be resilient. And even though they failed maybe once or twice, they got back up again and tried again. And so my message really is to be bold and be okay with failure. Because at the end of the day, it's those failures that will turn into successes if you just stick with it long enough.
Jen, you have a broad, wide field of experience. TED Talks, we'll talk about in a moment, podcast, authorship of a best-selling book, entrepreneur, but also product creator. I think I read somewhere once where you actually developed and innovated a shoe, a fitness shoe of some sort. It was a fascinating shoe. I'd love for you to kind of deconstruct that, what was so unique about it. But then I would also ask, could you tease out some of the design principles in terms of product creation and prototypes and innovation? Because I don't think everyone wants to write a book. But I do think everyone either wants to write a book or have a side hustle or has an idea or has some kind of creativity. And it's rare that we actually have product creators on our podcast. You have some intimate experience. Would you tell that story around the product and then maybe remind someone who is thinking of creating something physical what they need to be aware of?
Sure. Well, my first company was called No Gym Required, which was kind of the idea behind it was to give people these simple solutions to be healthier and more fit without going to the gym. So I created a shoe called the NGR shoe, No Gym Required, and it was a weighted shoe. So the midsole of the shoe was weighted. So the concept was while you walked around, you would be burning up to 25% more calories just because of the resistance, sheer weight of the shoe. I knew zero about manufacturing. I knew zero about the shoe business. But what I did know about, and what my big passion always has been, was fitness and health and wellness, right? And what I did was I kind of figured out, like, how can it give somebody a simple solution to exercise, burn more calories while kind of going through their life. And that's how, the light bulb moment of the shoe came on. Manufacturing was a bear. Like I said, I knew nothing about it. But what I did know and what I did do was I leaned into what I was very good at, or what my strong suits and skills were. And then I found a partner to offload or balance out my weaknesses. And that's a really big strategy that I do a lot. Like, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel or reinvent the shoe, so to speak, every time. What I try to do, and this shoe was a great example of it, is surround myself with people who knew areas of that business obviously better than I did. And then I focus on what I was good at. And then you build a team. I'm not somebody who believes that, that you can be successful on your own solo. It does take a team of people to really get yourself from A to B to C. And I think the mindset that you can do it all on your own is really a fallacy. So, and I never bought into that. So I think a big strategy, like I said, is really finding people that are good at what you're bad at and then working together.
In your book, you talk about the difference between baggage and luggage, and I really enjoyed this section of the book. Give us a little bit of that, and we'll talk about another concept in your book from an interview with Amanda Fox.
Yes. Amanda Fox or Amanda Knox?
Amanda Knox. Sorry, I caught myself.
Yeah. I was going to say, the baggage luggage that you're referring to is something that I do talk about in my book, because life is about reframe, right? In all perspective. You can see something negative or you can see something in a positive light, all about how you want to see it. And perception is not always reality, but like the luggage baggages, you can see luggage to me is very uplifting, positive. It gives you this concept of moving forward, taking a vacation. And baggage is this like really heavy feeling of like something weighing you down, negativity. And, why I really think it's important, I think that it's important to reframe concepts and ideas. And my book is really about how you can reframe and how you could really kind of move forward for success in how you see things. Like, there's another thing I talk about is like, farm it out or fix it. Don't focus on things, like, not to focus on the small stuff, not to focus on things that just bog you down, how to move forward. Like I say, I'm a big person. I'm a big action person. And I believe that life is all about momentum, right? Something in motion stays in motion. Something stagnant stays stagnant. So giving yourself the best chance of success is to reframe ideas, to take action, to really, really kind of figure out ways that you could pick yourself up from failure and keep on going. And a big thing that I talk about, and I think my first TED Talk was really, it went viral because of this idea, this concept, which was the 10% target. And the 10% target mindset is this concept of making 10 attempts at whatever you want most in life. And the idea behind it is, you may not get, you may not get to that goal, but going through this process, another opportunity will present itself by just taking action. And the second thing it does is that it gets you comfortable with the feeling of failure. Because if you already know in your brain that you're making these 10 attempts, you already kind of have that mindset that you're going to go through it. It makes it easier to fail and fall and get right back up again and keep on going. And I talk a lot about this in my book. I talk a lot about this in Success. And the truth of the matter is, of all the people, like I said, I've interviewed on my podcast, this is what people do. They have a reframe, they have a mindset that allows them to keep trying time and time again until they truthfully get closer to what they want and course correct to what they want.
Let's stay on TED. You have a metaphorical PhD on TED Talks because you've had the privilege to be invited back and have one that's, I think, ready to launch. Talk about what's next for your TED appearance.
Oh, this is the one I'm doing, the next one, the one that's coming out now. That one is about, so the first one was about how to be bold and how to ask for what you want. This one is about how to raise mentally strong children. I think that's a really important idea. I think that we're living in a time when we're in a culture where it's getting more and more difficult. People are stuck on screens. They stuck on social media. And so it is really becoming a problem for people's, for their mental health, quite frankly. And I try to give people these ways where we can kind of combat those things. And I think if we can start early about how to train somebody at a younger age to be mentally resilient, it will help them be mentally resilient adults. So why wait until they're adults to train people to be their personal best? Give them the habits, give them the skills, give them the tools early on, and they can hone them as they go. And I'm really passionate about that. I have two small kids of my own. And small is relative, a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old. But what I'm seeing out there is I really think that we're in trouble, and we need to all come together and really help the younger generation. And so that's where, like I said, that's a big area of mine right now.
Well, I think your timing is genius because, like you, because of who I podcast, interview, and have in my talent agency, I think there is a public zeitgeist that's focused on parenting right now. This morning I interviewed Dr. Leonard Sachs. He wrote the seminal book, The Collapse of Parenting. I've interviewed Amy Morin, who talks a lot about, the things you shouldn't be doing. And I think your timing on that is fantastic. I will look forward to posting about it and seeing it. In your book, you mentioned on the podcast, you interviewed Amanda Knox. You can remind us who she is. But you actually have an interesting topic that you discuss with her, because most of us have heard about the idea of positive visualization, but the two of you actually talk about something that kind of is the opposite of that. So remind us who Amanda Knox is and what is, if you will say, the opposite in the value from positive visualization to negative visualization.
Yeah, no, negative visual. Okay, so Amanda Knox she was a young girl who went to Italy, and she was convicted of murdering her roommate. She was 18 years old, and she was in an Italian prison, and it was the biggest media story for years. And she got out. She finally got what do you call the words?
Exonerated.
Exonerated.
Right.
And was able to come back to the U.S. She was a U.S. citizen, and I had her on my podcast, and it was fascinating because she was stuck in jail for years, and she really spoke to me about this concept of negative visualization, where she would think about like how she was able to get through. Was she would think of these things in her head and her life that were so bad that anything in comparison seemed better. And it was a really smart coping mechanism. And I think that it's like you turn the idea on your head. Like everyone talks about being positive and positivity. But if this whole concept was the opposite, she was thinking and telling me about all these terrible, terrible things that could happen, that could be. And so if you take it back and reverse engineer to your life, and you can think, it gives you perspective on where you are. And if you're like, you know what, like it's not so bad, right? Like it's kind of like the alternative to a gratitude journal. When you think of all the worst off scenarios that you could have versus where you are. And then you kind of feel, you know what, I'm actually kind of happy and grateful that I'm here in my life and where I'm at. It's like anything. You can go to the gym and you can look at somebody on your right and you can say, wow, they look amazing. Like, I'll never be that way. But you can look to your left and see someone who that feels the same way towards you. I believe that perspective is so important to your mindset, to your mental health, and to, going after your goals, going after what you want to achieve. And we are our own worst enemy. And if we need to figure out ways to kind of keep our mind right. And that's basically what it's about.
In fact, I think the American press actually tried and convicted her before the Italian court did. And it was fascinating to watch that story as an American who's been to Italy many times and to see her since then.
You remember the whole thing.
Oh, I remember it like it was yesterday. Of course I do. Yeah.
Crazy.
Like you, I have had the privilege of interviewing hundreds of people on this podcast. You and I have something in common. We both interviewed Matthew McConaughey, and I learned something interesting. I asked Matthew McConaughey what was like the biggest lesson he'd learned in life, and he shared this kind of hokey, sincere story about like one of his friends, uncles or grandfathers, once near the end of his life said, I spent my entire life worrying about things that never happened. And that has like stuck with me for years. Would you share, of all the people you've interviewed, business titans, entrepreneurs, celebrities, exonerated college students that were railroaded in the press, does one stand out like the one I just mentioned with McConaughey to say, this was great advice from someone who maybe I didn't expect that deep thinking or didn't realize they had faced this? Does one stand out on the hundreds and hundreds that you've also interviewed?
Okay, well, the first thing I would say, who I really enjoyed interviewing was Mark Cuban. And I'll tell you why. I found him to be very honest, earnest, authentic, and he gave really good tactile, actionable things that people can do to up-level their entrepreneurship. So I really appreciate that interview. What I find happens a lot of the times, and maybe you would agree with me, is people have their sound bites that they keep on saying over and over again when they go on all the different podcasts and they do all their media. And it feels very canned, very staged, and stale, quite honestly. So I really appreciate when people are really earnest and authentic and give me actual meat on the bone. And I really appreciate that about Mark Cuban. And I will say that the other thing I find very interesting is that it's always other people that I would think are like such big names and like, oh, wow, they're going to give me this like great, insight on this and that. And they leave me kind of lackluster. It's the other people that kind of the ones who are really thought provoking. Or a lot of them are just people that like are just regular people, not regular, no one's regular, but people that are not massive names but have a really good perspective and insight on a certain topic. So besides Matthew McConaughey, you know, who I thought I've always loved was this guy named BJ Fogg with a, you know, he wrote a book called Tiny Habits. Just simple things that really kind of help move the needle. If one more person comes on my show and talks about meditation and gratitude journaling, I mean, it's like, I feel like there are certain things that people just automatically just say. I'm looking for like the nitty gritty, the things that have not been said over and over and over again, or the word cold plunge. If I hear that again, you know, not to say these things don't work, but I think that there's so many things, like it's information overload, and there's so many different outlets. When people really kind of give me a little bit different, unique habits or rituals or perspective, I always appreciate it.
I adore BJ Fogg from Stanford. We interviewed him, and he is such a kind, earnest person.
Yeah.
Several years ago, I had the privilege of interviewing John Maxwell, the iconic leadership author.
And, I like him too.
Yeah, John's a really fine person, and he said to me something interesting. He said, Scott, who do I know that you need to know? And he wanted to introduce me to his network. Well, I'd like to ask you the same question. Who would you like to interview that I could help land for your podcast? Is there someone that you've been searching for that maybe I have a connection to?
No one's ever asked me that before.
Well, I am special.
I like that, Scott. Well, first of all, you know, when you said John Maxwell, I would love to have John Maxwell. I like John Maxwell. I've never even reached out to him before, but if you want to make that intro, that'd be great.
Done. Easy. Candy from a baby. Give me someone hard.
Also, I'm going to give, okay, now that I'm asking, I'm bold. How about Brene Brown?
Oh, I knew you were going there. I knew it. 2 minutes ago, I said she's going to say Brene Brown. Girl, if I had interviewed Brene Brown, I would be happy. I've been chasing her for 7 years. So put that in the tickler file. Give me someone else.
Wait, you have her book behind you.
Of course. Keep going. She's in the queue. She keeps canceling. Keep going. Who else? Come on. Who else? Slam dunk on John Maxwell. Who do you want?
Okay. I have a question for you. Who have you interviewed besides John Maxwell that you thought was a really interesting person?
Yeah, I think you have interviewed him. I'm a raving fan of Guy Kawasaki.
I've never interviewed him.
Then you're done. Guy Kawasaki is one of the most genuine, insightful entrepreneurs, evangelists for products. Came from Apple originally. It's great stories. Such a fine human being. I think Liz Wiseman wrote a book called Multipliers. Phenomenal interview. Kim Scott wrote Radical Candor. I'm a raving fan of Seth Godin. Lots of people that we've interviewed that are iconoclast, and they're just interesting people. So I'll get with you. We'll start with John Maxwell. We'll move to Guy Kawasaki. And when Brene Brown comes on this podcast, I will be telling her that Jen Cohen is her next interview. Your book is Bigger, Better, Bolder. Live the life you want, not the life you get. Jen Cohen, you're a class act. Thanks for investing in our time and group today.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.